Let's face it, marriage can be hard. He's messy. I'm neat. She talks a lot. I don't. I want more sex. She doesn't. I discipline the kids, so I'm the bad parent. She's a spender. I'm a saver. The list could go on. This week, we're going to discover how to make our marriages better with David and Teresa Ferguson. Let's get to it. How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. A really delight to have this week's podcast, my guests, David and Teresa Ferguson, and I've known both of them for several years, known David a little longer, and I don't know how I came across David's book, but they have a book that has had tremendous impact on Pamela and I's life. We use it every day, and it's called Call to Love, Devotions for Couples. And David and Teresa, I believe, got married. When you guys got married, I can't believe it. Like 16 years old, right?
Correct. We couldn't believe it either.
Yeah, it's hard for us to believe too, but yeah, 16 years old.
16 years. Now, how did your parents ever approve that?
They didn't.
In fact, Teresa has a saying about our parents and tears.
It was under duress. We basically said we were in our own form of rebellion, as you can imagine. And we basically gave them an ultimatum that we were going to run across the Kansas state line where we could get married with or without their permission. So I tell young couples that we counsel with, there were tears at my wedding, but they were not tears of joy. So I think that speaks volumes of how they felt.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's rare that somebody would get married at 16 and still be together. And you guys are, what, 30-something years together now?
You don't even want to know. You're off by a couple of decades. We just celebrated.
You need to update your new book because it says 35 back here.
we just celebrated 57 years.
57 years. Okay. Well, when I was writing up a little promo, I said over 50 years. That was what I was thinking. But then I looked at your book. I said, wait a minute.
So, what if that's 35 years in ministry?
No telling.
Married for more than 35 years. Well,
more. Okay. Yeah. I'd say more.
Well, anyway, you guys have been authors and speakers and really in this area of marriage have made a huge difference in the lives of people. And what we're going to talk about today is your devotional book. And it has 52 weeks of devotions on 52 different topics. And, I find that, one of the things about a book, I think books are the greatest value that people can ever invest in because you're getting a person's life. You're getting wisdom from many experiences, good and bad, and we're able to benefit from that. And so, in particular, this book, I think, is valuable because you guys are so vulnerable in the book. You really share your failures as well as your successes and what you've learned. And so we're going to unpack that today and get right to it. And if you're married, you got to have this book. I mean, this is the book. We'll give some information about it in our info, but it is a tremendous book. And so, you guys got married very young, and no doubt there were a lot of challenges getting married that young. And but when you think about those early days, besides crisis, what do you think of?
Well, I sometimes said we had 4 to 6 years worth of really rough marriage, and Teresa said, no, at least 10 to 12 were pretty rough, So she might actually comment on the honeymoon. If you're going to talk about rough starts and pain, well, she could give you our honeymoon story real quick.
Well, at 16 again, we're both so clueless about life. to start with. And David and I's habit was to run around with this other couple. And David liked to go play pool with Stanley, the male of the other couple. And so after we got married, because we ran around with them so often, they didn't think it was any big deal that we were married because we, double dated all the time. Stanley decided that morning that he wanted to go shoot pool with David. And so he came and knocked on our motel room door and invited David to go down to the pool hall to shoot pool. I was still asleep.
Well, she was asleep, Oz. Come on.
David thought, I do it all the time. So he goes off. Well, now, ladies, when you wake up and the man that you just married is not in the room with you, what are you thinking? Well, I thought that. And so I just got up and walked home. I didn't know what else to do. And when David got back to the hotel room, saw I wasn't there, of course, he was just panicking. And he came to my house and picked me up. So that was the beginning of some of our marital experiences. Now, David was talking about the 8 to 10 years. That was one example of the 8 to 10 years of hurting one another unintentionally, Oz. Yeah. And yet it was still hurting. And we often like to tell people, you can unintentionally drop a bowling ball in somebody's foot, but they're still left with what? Pain. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what to do with that pain remains in each of us. And so that's what we had for 8 to 10 years between us. One night, David asked me, Teresa, do you love me? And I had to be honest with him and said, David, I don't feel anything for you, because that bearing that pain had just caused me to grow numb. There was never a thought of leaving, of divorcing. It was a thought of what we're taught so much at church. Just press on, just stuff it down and keep going. And that's what we did. Yeah. So that happened. That's what happens when you do that. You become numb.
Yeah, I remember what Ruth Bell Graham once said about being married to Billy Graham. Have you ever felt tempted to divorce him? He says, no, but I have been tempted to kill him.
Yeah, that's right. Amen.
So, one of the attributes of your book is that I think people will gain so much from is the vulnerability of sharing your stories and not being afraid to really, say, this is what I was. I mean, some of the stories you share, David, I say, oh my gosh, I did that though.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
My wife and I, we definitely both follow your characters, in terms of your journey, and often share the same experiences. So it is a great book for really, I think a lot of people have this idea that so many marriages are perfect out there, and you should have this expectation of marriage that's really unrealistic. And so I think this book really helps us get down into the trenches with you and helping us gain wisdom to know how to build on that marriage. So David, let me ask you a question. You often share how you were not sensitive to the needs of Teresa in your marriage, and you gave a lot of examples of that. Is that something just innate within all of us guys?
Yeah, it may be a genetic deficiency or something. I don't know what it is, but it's again, my wife calls it clueless. I have had a lot of clueless moments, and in fact, one of my earliest memories of getting a clue was right after that comment of David, I don't feel anything for you, I just feel numb. I remember maybe a month or so later, as I was pouring myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and I had this epiphany of a thought. Why don't you pour your wife one? It's like, I didn't know you could carry 2 cups of coffee, And
I was shocked when you walked in with it.
And so, I'm a recovering clueless person, and still in recovery. But I've had to work at it. I've had to work at being intentional of noticing and caring. And it is a challenge, but I'm excited. I'm trending better.
He is trending. I can vouch for him. He is trending. A ways to go, but trending.
We have a mutual friend, I think, Ford Taylor, teaches in his webinar or classes. He'll say, now, ladies, I just want you to understand that every man has an empty box. And when they're in their empty box, they're not thinking about anything. They're just empty. Now, you may not believe that, but it really is true.
That's right. And my empty box is pretty large, apparently.
We all got it. Well, Teresa, you're very candid about sharing some of the control issues that were in your life in the marriage, and you were able to go back and say why you had those tendencies. Tell us a little bit about that, and do you feel like that's more common to women, or is it common to both, or what are the roots of some of that you experienced?
I think it's common to both. The fear that makes you want to control, that's the base of it. That's what drives it, is a fear of not being taken care of. They were talking about him not noticing me, him not being in my world. Well, obviously that would be fearful for me, but David doesn't care, i.e. honeymoon story. So when we fear something, we have a tendency to want to control it. And it can be men or women. So it's not a pigeonhole of sexes. Men can be just as controlling as women, but to look underneath that need to control and ask why. It's always a why question. Why do I feel like I need to control? And for me, it was fear-driven. And it was definitely out of my childhood. Growing up, I was with a family. I was the fifth of 6 kids. And my mother and daddy were very uninvolved in our lives. I was basically left to myself. So the fear of, does anybody care? The fear of, is anybody going to be there for me? Am I going to be taken care of? Are my needs going to be met? Am I going to be financially taken care of? So between the fear and what I just mentioned would bring a tremendous lack of security. Security in my environment, security with the people that are around me. So hence the controlling. I'll just have to take care of it myself. And that comes out in wanting to control who you're with. Just so I don't have to fear and I'll be secure in myself. That's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
So when that happens in a relationship where one spouse feels controlled by the other spouse, what should the spouse that feels control do at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question, Oz. I think really 2 things, quite frankly, that it took me about a decade. It took us about a decade to travel this fear controlling journey together. To just begin to ask those questions, trace it back to some childhood roots as an example. But the 2 things were these. First of all, from a scriptural point of view, during that decade, I was just, every time I'd read the scriptures, I was encountering this perfect love cast out fear. And to be able for God to kind of say to me, okay, you maybe have discerned together, Teresa, you're fearful, but me labeling her as that's just your fears wasn't helping.
No, it didn't at all. Trust me.
In fact, they might have gotten worse.
Yeah.
And so the challenge to me was, David, how can you more perfectly love her in order to help diminish those fears? And so what that drove me to were some practical expressions of taking thought of her, of being sensitive to her, and in a sense, taking more initiative, all right? In other words, as I might feel controlled that, David, are you going to pick up that bathroom countertop? David, are you going
Do you know how to drive from point A to point B?
Yeah, right. So when I would experience those, it's like, okay, what could I do for her not to have to remind me to pick up the bathroom countertop. Well, it was another epiphany that says, well, I probably ought to pick it up and put it all in the drawer. And so why don't I just go ahead and do that? and the fact that I have in some way more perfectly loved her by taking thought of it, doing it, and then I'll startle her that she doesn't have to ask. And so lo and behold, that was a really important journey for us. And so that's helped. The second thing I'll say is when she occasionally then slipped into it anyway.
Come on.
I've learned to practice another Bible principle of speak the truth in love. And so rather than saying, honey, would you quit nagging me all the time, okay, which didn't seem to help, we learned these expressions of, honey, it would mean a lot to me if, okay, Teresa, I'd really appreciate it if, you might let me drive to the office the way I would like to drive to the office rather than your perfect way.
Yeah,
okay?
we kind of came up, we try to play it off, make it fun. And we kind of came up with this one. When he's in his car, he gets controlled the way he goes.
That's right.
When I'm in my car, I control the way I go.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a funny story about that very type of situation. I had a friend who was married, and he tells this story about his wife would constantly tell him how to drive, when to turn, when to stop. I mean, it was like over the top. And he obviously knew where he was going. He knew the roads and everything, but she wanted to tell him to turn left here, turn right here.
Yep.
And it absolutely drove him crazy. Well, after a period of time, he finally said, God, I don't know what you're doing with this, but I'm going to change. I'm going to start affirming her and thanking her for her comments rather than getting frustrated and telling her not to do that. So that went on for a period of time. And then all of a sudden, one day she woke up and said, honey, I just had an epiphany. I just realized why I tell you how to drive. I came from a big family, and I had to take care of all these kids as being the oldest sibling. And I had to direct people this way and that way and this way and that way. And I just realized I do the same thing with you. Will you forgive me?
Yeah, good. These
but
epiphanies,
he had to get to a place.
These epiphanies work both ways, these epiphanies. It's not just men who have them. So that's a great story right there. That's good.
So I'm going to give you an update on the controlling driving thing. So one of the things, you have to learn your spouse. You have to learn each other. And David does need me, he'll admit, in helping him drive. And this is how he needs me. But I've had to learn to observe. When we get in the car and start someplace, David can be off into Timbuktu and when we're going to the office. And I can tell if I just look over at him and he gets his glazed look. And I can tell
my wife does the same thing.
Yeah.
He's in Timbuktu.
It's the empty box. It's the empty box.
It's the box. Yeah.
And I had to just right time say, honey, were you going to the office? Because he was going to Timbuktu.
She's right. She's right.
Yep. Our wives have to keep us in the lane.
That's right. So it's been a fun journey, but we're enjoying it. We have fun with it, and have navigated that one. And so we haven't had any problems with that one in decades.
Well, I have a friend who is a counselor, and one of the things he was saying is that so often when you're in a relationship and a person has a response to something that should be a 2 response emotionally, but they go to a 10 response. He says the reason that happens is that person has an unresolved emotional hurt that came from their childhood that they have not dealt with. And so by understanding that, you can get to really resolve and maybe help that person get healing. But if you simply react to it, it's simply going to do worse. What would be your insights on that?
Yeah, that's great. Great insight. The idea there. The idea there is that those emotional hurts and wounds that we may have experienced in our growing up, they don't just automatically heal themselves. And we sometimes communicate something called the emotional cup, where there is a part of your brain where you actually start accumulating hurt or anger or bitterness, resentment, fear, anxiety. And if we don't work through those things biblically, they do accumulate. And so that's very true. And therefore, if we can kind of understand that, then we actually can experience an extra measure of grace, when those times come. Yeah, okay, sorry. Okay. So she's checking on a little battery charger cable here for me. So that's great wisdom. And so one of the things that it does is, if we come to understand that, it gives a partner, I think, compassion for a spouse, and we're able to, let me move over here a little closer. We're able to, to have more compassion for a spouse. That says, when I get that kind of overreaction, you first of all, you don't personalize it. That, hey, that 10 response I got wasn't really for me. Mm-hmm. It was really about someone else, something else, and that's helpful. And then secondly, we learned that we then turn aside, and at this point it would be my responsibility, if I got that from her, to turn aside and explore that with her. Honey, I just can't help but wonder that, maybe what we touched on yesterday might have been something that's kind of unhealed from a time back, and I'd love to think about that with you, talk about that, and express any kind of compassion and care for it that I can. So we've had many of those conversations, and it's been beautiful to see, Oz, how those 10 responses start coming down, and that now we're able to both, having processed a lot of those childhood things, find that our reactions to one another are kind of in line with what they should have been. I still do stupid things, and when I do, I get a 1 or 2 response back, and I should. So great question.
Well, it's a good reminder. Go ahead.
God just brought this to my mind. I know some men think, why do I have to be the leader? Why do I always have to start it? They seemingly, and David's got a great story about how God impressed on him about who came first, who came to save us first. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, you did a great job.
Yeah, no, thank you, honey. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for telling me I do a good job. That's good.
You get a twofer on that one.
That's right. Oz, when the scripture talks about husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, I kind of put that together with the epistle text that says that he, Christ, left his world and came into our world, the bride of Christ world, in order that he could take the bride of Christ into his world, into eternal life. And so if we're going to love like Christ, one of the ways that he loved was that he left the glories of heaven, became a man, humbled himself to death on the cross. So I think there's some beautiful connections there for how God will give a husband an extra measure of grace and prompting of the Holy Spirit to enter her world. So that's helped me really understand a little bit more of my role in loving her like Christ loved the church.
Yeah, that's awesome. So just let us pause for a minute, and let me just say that this is what we're talking about. A lot of the principles that are involved in this book, Devotions for Couples. If you don't have it, it's a great book to get, and my wife and I use it every morning, and it's a great way to start your day and really unpack things that every couple goes through. And that area of when somebody's wounded and hasn't really received healing for that issue, it can be so explosive for couples, especially a guy who doesn't really get that, who's reactive to say, well, I didn't do that. I'm being wrongfully accused here, or, and on the surface, all that could be right, but there's something greater going on that's a heart issue that somebody, and it can be either spouse that's going through that. But I tell you, it's wisdom and so freeing to be able to sit back and say, okay, John 10:10 says that Satan wants to steal, kill, and destroy from our lives. And in marriage, he's going to come at us in different ways. He's going to come through our woundedness and our pain and things that have happened to us in our lives. And so just to know that, John 8:32 says, the truth shall make you free. And knowing the truth about our history and our lives and really helps us bring intimacy into our relationship.
Yeah, Oz, one other thing as you're talking about that would be just a real connection to the book, which I really appreciate you and Pamela journeying with us daily in our journey through that book. But the origins of how we were led to write that really relate a lot to what you just said, and that is in our journey of exploring, some of those roots of pain and so forth. We were both challenged to then say, okay, underneath that overreaction, underneath that pain, what is this person needing? What are they needing? Okay. If we're supposed to speak words according to the need of the moment, even like I'm supposed to speak words to her according to the need of the moment, what does she need? And so I'm going to have her tee up this little quick story, and then you'll actually then understand how we wrote a book that here are 52 relational needs you have, and that's what each of those are each week. Because as I was exploring this, I did a lot of work in my doctorate program on biblical anthropology, trying to understand how people are created and motivated. And as I'm working on, we are created to need relationships with God and with other people. I come home and I end up when she's frustrated and slamming the cabinet doors or whatever she's doing. And I remember saying to her, well, honey, what do you need? And this is the response I got.
It was like cold water in my face. I don't need anything. I'm this self-sufficient, in control woman. I don't need anything. But as he asked me that, the thought came to my mind, I didn't know I had needs other than I need to get the wash done. I need to take care of the kids. I need to do dinner. I need to, all the things out there. But for me personally, have a need, I didn't know. I was clueless. And so David then said about saying, okay, well, let's find out. And so that was kind of our homework. We would talk about things, and he started putting, if I was upset, he started saying, what's wrong with you? He put it more in a form of, let's talk about what you might be needing. Let's look at what's going on today, and let's put it in a need word. Well, I needed help with that because I didn't know how to do it. And it seems so shallow, but it's true. If we've not been in touch with our needs, realize we had needs, we don't even think about them, much less have a vocabulary for them. So that was a great journey for us to be able to label some of these things that I was feeling and put a word of need on it.
Yeah, where we started on that journey probably took us 3 years, I think, to really, since we were discovering these 52 needs, and we had to find them all in Scripture, but we started with the 10 one another's of Scripture. It says if we need to, since the Bible says accept one another, encourage one another, support one another, well, obviously we must need those things. And so that's the format of those 52 weeks. And so it's been a fun journey. We have taught that kind of message for, more than 15,000 couples from 50 countries of the world.
And it passes down to your children and your grandchildren as well.
Yeah. So it's been fun. Thank you all for joining us in that marriage devotional journey, as hundreds and thousands of other couples do. It's fun to hear about their comments.
As you were describing that story, it reminds me of this video that's been on the internet for several years called "It's All About the Nail." Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
It's a story about the woman who's having a headache and a nail's out of her head, and her husband's trying to say, well, honey, I think it's because you're always doing that. You're always trying to fix me. Why can't you just listen to me?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually saw that video just a couple of days ago. I was skimming through some Vimeo that we use, and sure enough, I saw that, and I sit there and watched it, that kind of thing. And I don't know. Anyway, if the audience hadn't seen it, they ought to look it up. It's all about the nail. Because as you know, the closing scene is he's finally empathetic, and he's comforting her for her headache. And then she leans over to give him a kiss and stabs him in the forehead with a nail. So it's great.
It's classic, isn't it? So, Teresa, what would be the biggest advice that you would give a husband there's so many things, but if there were one thing that could say, you just sit down with one husband, and if you just remember this one thing, you'll get by. Is there anything like that?
To live with your wife in an understanding way.
Yeah.
Really, there's not one thing. It's know your wife. And knowing is you've got to know her, what's going on inside of her head, but also what's going on inside of her heart. And that takes time, and it takes listening. And it's not trying to fix her, or if the reverse is true, it's not trying to fix him, but to understand each other and meet each other at that point of need.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's caused me, that simple answer, husbands, live with your wife in an understanding way, to just say, I'm a lifelong student of my wife. I am just learning and understanding her constantly. Everything from she doesn't wet the toothbrush before she brushes her teeth, and I do. Or, she likes, if I get in bed at first at night, for me to turn down her side of the bed. Or when she's going to drink her coffee, I've got a choice between yellow stuff, pink stuff, and blue stuff, and I need to choose the pink stuff. You know what I mean?
No, it's yellow now.
No, don't be changing on me. So, it's not, it's kind of mysterious, but it's not rocket science.
But Oz, I think that example right there, I've changed. We should all be ever changing, right? We don't want to grow old and not be different. We want to keep growing and changing. So that means the job is never done.
Are you telling me you really have changed? And I've not noticed.
You've not noticed.
Okay. I told you I'm a lifelong journey.
Okay, that's chapter 53 now.
You have me back in about a year, and I'll see if I say yellow this time. I'm picking the yellow stuff.
Oz, he sees it on the kitchen cabinet every morning. You would think he would clue in, right?
Yeah, I can relate. So is there any assumption that spouses make the most, wrong assumptions, that if we would just not make that assumption, we'd be better off?
Well, one of them that comes to my mind that I know I bought into for the first decade or so, as it relates to these needs, is to assume that my partner needs what I need. Okay. In other words, in our relationship, I'm the more touchy-feely. I need the, greet me at the door with a hug. I need the verbalize, I love you. All right. And for years I thought, well, I need that. So I'm chasing around the house, man. I'm going to give her some affection. I just assume that's what she needs.
That's never on my list.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think that's one. And if we'll kind of drop that assumption, well, if she doesn't really need necessarily what I need, then what does she need? It puts me on that journey of, as Teresa said, better trying to get to know her, to understand her. So that's one assumption that comes to my mind.
And I think it's the same with we women. What we think we need, we want our husbands to meet that need, yet we won't tell them. We won't tell them what it is. We won't tell them what it looks like. Needs, we can all have the same need for attention, and it look different in every person's life to meet that target. And so we lots of times go into a relationship thinking, well, I need attention, and this is what it looks like for me. Surely you want that same kind of attention. And we miss each other. It's like, just going past each other. And so we assume that person is going to need the same things that I do in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, she mentioned one there that I think is one that we've really learned to avoid, and that is this assumption that I don't need to tell you what I need, but I am upset it ain't happening. Okay, I mean, we just got to break out of that pattern, And she had more difficulty with that than I did. In other words, I was
I mean,
more.
after all, he's a psychologist. He ought to know people, right?
Well, I had a rude awakening when Pamela and we've been only married 4.5 years, and we went through the 5 love languages book. And I said, well, honey, which one of these is your love language? All 5 of them. I said, that's not fair. You can't do that.
Yeah, right.
Well, you, Teresa, you brought up something a moment ago about fixing our spouse. What's your advice when one spouse is tempted to fix the other?
I had the greatest example of being angry with David one time because he didn't perform in a certain way. And I just, I had a fit. I basically threw a fit and yelled at him and everything. And I went into the laundry room and I was, just, how we'll do. And I went in the laundry room and it wasn't too long before God started taking my finger, pointing at him and bringing it back to me. And it's the log and the splinter principle. Teresa, are you perfect? Do you do this right every time? And it still works in my life today. I will want to be critical or judgmental about something he's doing or not doing. And I have to think, now, Teresa, you're not perfect at this either. Are you throwing a stone when you shouldn't be, and look at yourself. So I think it's always good for us not to judge too quickly, harshly, and just kind of lump somebody in, well, they're just this, when that's not true.
Yeah, I think we sometimes get in this. We sometimes get into this fix-it mode when our mind begins to say, "Well, he always, she never," and those sentences are typically not true about anybody. Okay, in other words, the more truthful thing is, well, they occasionally do that, and then it's like, well, and I occasionally do that too. So all of a sudden, there's a more level playing field.
Yeah. So, David, you talked about, husbands, there's 2 distinctives in both spouses. Husbands are called to love our wives and lay our lives down for our spouses. And wives are supposed to respect the husbands. Teresa, what does that mean to you and David that you respect your husband? What does that mean?
I want to say what it doesn't mean. I'm going to tell you how practically it works in my life. Talking about these roles and responsibilities that we come into marriage thinking my husband should do this because this is what my father did, or I should be this as a wife because that's what my mother did. It's looking at each one of us and looking at our own gifts and talents and bringing those mutually into the relationship and it not be a black and white thing. So respect would be one of those things sometimes we want to make black and white. And it's per individual, per couple. And one of the ways that I know lots of times I disrespect David is when he's trying to tell me something or explain something to me, and I start agreeing or disagreeing and butt in. That's a real bad habit of mine. I'm thinking, okay, I know this, not. Instead of just sitting there and calmly letting him finish his sentences and then have a discussion, I'd show him great disrespect by butting in when he's trying to make a point or finish a sentence.
That's good.
Yeah, and that's a good example of this idea of the sense of respect has to do with how uniquely different we are. For example, in that illustration, I'm much more the verbal person than she is. In other words, she's kind of what she called a bottom line person.
A real black and white.
So if she's gonna tell me something, it's in about 2 or 3 sentences and it's all done.
And he uses a page.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a page person. I'm 2 or 3 sentences.
Yeah. So she's learned to respect me to say, let me get my whole page out. Okay. You know, and so that's been a fun thing so that, yes, you know, the word has to do with deferring to one another. And I think that's deferring to one another's uniqueness. And it underlying it's the giving of respect is to say, you don't have to be like me. You don't have to do it like me. I just respect you as a person. So giving one another their uniqueness, I think, is a real important experience of respect that we have in our marriage, and I'm really grateful for it.
You know, our friend Ford Taylor once said, you know, a man tends to compartmentalize a whole lot more than a woman. And he'll draw this picture and he'll say, this is a picture of a man here. And he has all these boxes and he goes in and out of these boxes. But then there's one box that he has that he'll go to quite often, and it's called the sex box. And it's the biggest box in his house.
And in his mind.
In his mind. So
let's be real.
This is one of those that in marriages, you know, there's always a struggle there that the man wants more, the woman feels like he's a sex addict if he wants it more than X number of times and so forth. So give us some wisdom on how to balance that whole area for couples.
Oh, I'll give you maybe 2 or 3 quick ones, and then I'm sure she's got wisdom. But for us, I think it's been on the journey of, kind of a biblical perspective on oneness or intimacy has a spiritual component of being kind of spiritually on the same page. It has kind of a friendship component of, making sure that our connection, communication, our dating, my giving to her in non-sexual ways is important. So
That's
I think
what you call priming the pump.
yeah. So I think that's been a learning lesson for me to make sure that intimacy, if I would use that word, isn't only and always just about physical sex, but it includes spiritual closeness and friendship closeness. I think that's been helpful. And then maybe a second one is learning to express your desires to one another more openly. Sometimes we would have ended up in a pattern of being kind of sexually disconnected because I had not expressed to her, hey, I'm looking forward to us maybe being together this weekend. All right. So I just kind of said, hey, you be thinking about it. I would enjoy it for us to be sexually intimate this weekend. And in that sense, I'm giving her a little warning. So when she prays, maybe God will get her attention and lead her that same direction.
He does.
But I used to just kind of surprise her with all this pent up sexual energy, and I hadn't warned her it was coming, So us being more open to talking about our sexual closeness has really been helpful to us.
In all of our married lives, there's ebbs and flows. There's premarital, get married. That's a great, great segue of life. Then you go into kids. That's a whole nother stage of sexual, problems with kids and no sleep. And then you get into teenage life, and teenagers are around all the time. You don't have any privacy. So there's all kinds of hindrances that can be for our intimacy. But I think the communication of this is what's going on in my life right now. I realize, and it's time. I know it's time. And my job is, if he brings it up, to remember it. And we actually calendar it. And some people think, well, that's terrible. But at least it's on my mind, and I'm going to purpose that I, give to my husband sexually. And so we just had to learn to do different things. Right now, we've got nobody in the house. We're home alone, and it's great. Sex is great. So don't give up on it if you think, well, this is the worst. We're 73, and sex is good at 73. We both enjoyed it 73.
There you go.
That's awesome. Good. That's great. That's great. Well, this has been great to spend this time together. I want to close our time and see if you would make any adjustments to this. This actually came from Craig Hill with Family Foundations, and he used to be on my board. And it's a little tip sheet on how to advise a wife and a husband when they have a conflict. So here you go. For a wife, stop accusing and ask questions. Quote, I sense that I've made you feel like you're not acceptable in my sight and I don't appreciate um, your efforts. Is that true? Please share with me, how did I make you feel? At the time, I didn't realize that I was making you feel falsely accused and unappreciated. But now I can see that is exactly what I did. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? You may ask forgiveness, ask specific forgiveness for criticizing or rejecting, accusing, or ungratefulness, whichever words are most pertinent in the current situation. Thank you so much for all you do for me and our family. You're an awesome husband. Thank him for the specific things he has done to love and care for you. So that was for the wife. For the husband, don't try to answer her question. Answer the question with a question. By the tone of your voice, I sense that I've hurt you. Is that true? please share with me, how did I make you feel? At the time, I didn't realize that I made you feel such and such, but now I see that that is exactly what I did. I'm so sorry. Will you please forgive me? You may ask forgiveness for the specific ways she has shared you made her feel not loved, uncared, or not listened to. I love you, and the last thing I would ever want to do is hurt you or make you feel like I don't love you or care about you. Is that good advice or bad advice?
No, that's good stuff. Just really succinctly, we sometimes characterize it of don't use you statements. That's accusation. Use I statements. I feel, I would enjoy, I would appreciate. And then get down to really James 5:16 from time to time, confess your faults to one another. And we like to say that it means be specific. It sounds like be specific. Here's what I did. I criticized, I was insensitive, whatever. Admit it's wrong. That was wrong. That's what confess means. Will you forgive me? So that's been a beautiful lesson for us. And, with all this sheltering in place and spending a whole lot of time home over these last 3 or 4 months, I tell you, I've upped my confession game too, Oz. I'm telling you. So it's been awesome.
I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but I said, one of the byproducts of this COVID crisis of being isolated is there's probably going to be a lot more babies in about 9 months.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, that's good counsel. I used to tell people when we were doing a whole lot of marital counseling, we've never seen a couple come to counseling saying, would you make my partner quit apologizing to me as much? Never heard that. So keep the apologies coming. Great to be with you, Oz.
Well, let me just say that you guys' website, your name of your ministry is Intimate Life Ministries, right, for the couples and marriage, but you have the Great Commandment Network, greatcommandment.net. That's the website for you there, right?
Yeah, that's the best website for the store. That's right, greatcommandment.net.
You got a store there, and we have the book in our store at TGIF Bookstore, so you can go either place to get it. And stay connected with them. They've got great resources, especially relational needs stuff. They've got a great self-assessment on there on relational needs. So, guys, thanks so much for being with us, and God bless, and keep the next 60, right?
Here we go. Good to be with you all. Tell Pamela hi for us.
Thank you.
I will.
Bye-bye.
Bye.